This episode of The Old Man and the Three is presented by BMW, the brand that is constantly raising standards for performance and innovation. BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Welcome to The Old Man and the Three with JJ Redick and Tommy Alter, brought to you by 342 Productions. This is episode 238. Tim Legler, nobody I'd rather talk hoops with than Tim Legler. We talk in depth about both the Boston Celtics and Indiana Pacers series, as well as the Dallas Mavericks and Minnesota Timberwolves series. We are recording this Friday afternoon. We have gotten through two games in the Eastern Conference. We are about 4.5 hours away from the start of Game 2 of the Western Conference. But the things we talk about in the Western Conference will be pertinent not only tonight, but throughout this series. Before we do our conversation with Tim Legler, of course, let's do our DraftKings Sportsbook segment. Right now, NBA championship odds. Boston, the odds-on favorite. They're up 2-0 in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're at minus 200. Dallas, of course, as of this recording, up 1-0 in the Western Conference. They're at plus 360. Minnesota at plus 500. Pacers plus 800. As far as I know, I'm still waiting on Tyrese Haliburton's injury. Dallas actually is getting 6 points tonight against the Timberwolves. The one thing I want to talk about, because it looks like after these first two games and with Haliburton's hamstring injury, it looks like Boston is in a very favorable position to win the Eastern Conference and be in the finals. And to me, this is important because Kristaps Porzingis, who I've called a cheat code all season, Kristaps Porzingis potentially has another week to 10 days to recover from his calf strain. I think against either team in the Western Conference, whether it's Dallas or Minnesota, Kristaps Porzingis is the key. I think about, Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns, those guys, drop coverage, Karl-Anthony Towns potentially switching. Boston can win without him. Kristaps Porzingis is the key for Boston to win against whoever wins the Western Conference. Look, I'm not saying the series is over in the East. I'm not saying that at all. But I do feel like if Boston goes on and gets to the finals, whether it's Dallas, whether it's Minnesota, whether it's Daniel Gafford, whether it's PJ Washington, whoever ends up guarding Kristaps Porzingis, he is the key for Boston to win an NBA championship. And we have seen with Boston, when Tim and I get into this team so deep, especially at the top. You see Game 5 in Cleveland, Al Horford, 22 points, 15 rebounds, blocks, assists. Jaylen Brown last night, 40 points. Derrick White, of course, has had his moments. They have a ton of guys capable. Jrue Holiday's been insane the first two games of this series against Indiana. They have a ton of guys capable of carrying the offensive load and producing at a very high level. Against these two teams in the Western Conference, they are going to need Kristaps Porzingis not only to be healthy, but to be effective. So that's the biggest thing for me right now when I sort of look at Boston and their championship. And I felt this way all season. People, and Tim and I get into this, people have talked about this Boston Celtics team as it relates to previous Boston Celtics teams. Well, they're different. They're different if Kristaps Porzingis is in the lineup. They're different because of Jrue Holiday. They're different because Derrick White has taken another step. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown have figured out how to manipulate the basketball game. So we can't talk about them in the same way. And the biggest reason to me is Kristaps Porzingis. So that's what I'm sort of monitoring as I think about Boston versus whoever wins the Western Conference. Dallas, again, the favorites to win the Western Conference, but they are the underdogs tonight against Minnesota in Game 2.
We're this close to crowning an NBA champ, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code JJ. That's code JJ for new customers to get a no sweat bet up to $1,500 if your first bet doesn't hit. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in West Virginia, visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. One no sweat bet per new customer issued as one bonus bet based on amount of initial losing bet. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.co/bball for eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources.
And for all of you watching on video, does get a little bit laggy. Again, I'm in between games right now, guys. I'm doing the best I can, right? I got Boston and D. I'm doing the best I can. And I apologize. Let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to high-level basketball conversation with one of the GOAT analysts of all time, Tim Legler.
Legs, what's up, man? We are in the thick of it right now. I know you have a very busy schedule. I feel like for me, every other night I have a game, and it feels like every night you're on SVP at midnight, and then you're back on Get Up or First Take at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. So we're going to try to fit this in today. We are recording this on Friday afternoon, so we are going to cover Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals. Look ahead to Game 2 tonight, and obviously, we won't be able to react to that. And then Games 1 and 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Before we get to really specific stuff about both games, talking with a bunch of people, Braun and I kind of covered some of these topics on Wednesday on Mind the Game. I think there's a number of things that we've seen throughout the playoffs. Like, if you want to win in the playoffs, you need X. And it used to be a very simple answer to me. If you want to win in the playoffs, you need a top 5 player. You need 2 top 15 players. It feels like you need 7 guys right now that are high-level impact players that, regardless of matchups, can oscillate in between a series, in between a game, and help you win the game. It doesn't feel like you can get away with a top-heavy roster anymore in the NBA. That to me is my biggest takeaway. I have another takeaway I want to get to in a second, but that's my biggest takeaway. You need 7 guys right now.
I love that. I think it's a great place to start. I agree with that. You like the depth of guys that can do multiple things. I also think, JJ, I think we're at an era where, like, the specialist guy that does one thing very well and he eats up a lot of minutes for you. If you look at these teams, fewer of those guys that there's room for. Like that, that lockdown defender that can't shoot. Like, there were teams that went really far. Some teams that played in finals, won championships with guys that got minutes like that, like literally complete afterthought defensively, didn't have to guard those guys at all. And on the other end of the floor, they were guarding guys and having their impact that way. I don't think that you can have that anymore either. So you're talking about having 7, 8 guys that can play. I also think amongst those guys, you need versatility. You need guys that are capable of doing other things too. Even if it's not necessarily what they're known for, it's not their wheelhouse. And I'll take a guy like Aaron Nesmith's a great example for this, right? He's a guy that's known, kind of made a name for himself in this league a little bit and stuck in the league because he's a physical defender that can slide laterally and guard bigger wings and stuff like that. But look at what he's doing offensively now, like with making some mid-range jumpers off the dribble, making some threes, taking the ball like from half court if he gets a thrown ahead to him and getting all the way to the rim and laying it in. And that's a guy that you would have thought that was the same exact player like 10 years ago. You say, okay, just guard and then go stand in the corner and shoot 28% from the 3. And that was fine. You're still going to get 28, 30 minutes. Like, there were teams that had guys like that. That's the other thing I think you need. You need versatility. Like, those 7 guys need to do a lot of different things on the court. And that means on some nights, that means shot making too. We're going to need some of that out of you as well. I think that is what it's going to take. I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's interesting because you bring up the specialist. And I don't know how it was in the 90s when you played, but I know when I was in college and there were drafts, in the early 2000s and through the 2000s where it was like there were certain guys that were a little bit ahead of their time. And by that, I mean they were drafted high and they didn't have a specialist role. They were kind of Swiss Army guys, and you kind of didn't know where to put them. Right? What's your position, right? And it's in some ways we are moving further and further towards positionless basketball. Even with Minnesota, by the way, who plays too big. So you can make an argument, hey, it's the return of size and length and big teams. But every single guy on their roster is required to do so many different things. Cat is required to guard multiple positions. Cat is required to play multiple roles on the offensive end. It's not one thing anymore. And so I think the Swiss Army guy, right? The guy, like the best example of this I have is Josh Hart. Like Josh Hart can play in any playoff series for any team. Now, there are times where certainly a team is going to play off of him and he's got to make them pay from beyond the arc, but he just does so many things on a basketball floor. Jaden McDaniels does so many things on a basketball floor. TJ McConnell can't shoot threes. He does so many things to impact winning. It's not one thing. And so I think it's a little bit of a shift back to your point on versatility is spot on. But specifically with each player, you have to be able to do a bunch of different things within a game for you to be on the court, basically.
Totally.
And that's a different thing than it was 6 years ago, certainly 10 years ago when I was in the middle of my career. It's a totally different thing.
I completely agree with that. You now like it's what you're going to be asked to do over the course of the game. Like there's just a lot more boxes you're going to have to check that you're going to have to do. And there's a list you could come up with of 20 different things that any basketball player potentially could do on a court. And there used to be guys that would play significant minutes and have major roles on good teams that only check 2 or 3 of those. Now you're going to have to check a lot more boxes in terms of this might pop up in the game, and we're going to need you to do this, whether it's versatility and positions of who you have to guard, size that you have to guard, profile of player that you might be guarding. And then on the other end of the floor, like those guys that are just kind of not involved offensively. There were a lot of guys that had great careers in this league that they just really had no role in the offense, except for maybe as an offensive rebounder. That was about it. That's just not the case anymore. All these teams, and even like look at some of the teams playing now. You mentioned Josh Hart as one guy and they've obviously been eliminated, but he just had a long run. We were talking about him a lot. Even look at a guy like Derrick Jones right now.
I was just going to say him. Yes, it's a great example.
Look what Derrick Jones is doing for Dallas right now. Like, yeah, we knew he could defend. If that's like, and he'd make highlight reels because you throw a lob to him or he'd get a breakaway and he'd do something crazy because his bounce is outrageous. But now look at the guy. He's making threes. He's weak side slashing on those late finds that Luka's so good with, where he's coming in and catching and finishing. Like they're counting on Derrick Jones to give them X amount of production. Like we need those, whatever it's going to be. We need those 10 out of you. That 12 you gave us, they were all important. And that wasn't the case before. Like you could play a guy like that 20 minutes, get 2 points out of him, and that's all. That you didn't matter because we're only focused on these other things he's doing. That's not the case anymore. These guys have to do more than that. PJ Washington, his running mate there, what he's done with his offensive game for this team. They wouldn't be here right now if it was for PJ Washington and the way that he's played to this extent. And again, he was like this sort of, role player, fill in the blanks kind of guy in Charlotte, like whatever, but modest expectations. That's not the case with this team. They're like, no, we need all that. And you got to guard 3 or 4 different types of players. So all these teams have these guys. And for me, it makes it way more entertaining to watch because you don't have guys that are that limited and you're only focused on 3 guys offensively for each team every night. That's just not the case. All of these guys have a chance to have an imprint throughout the game. That's really important. All of them that are still playing.
Yeah. And the other point, and I think this is important when we look ahead, particularly with the second apron coming up after this offseason. Free agency, what we knew it for a long time in the NBA, particularly in my career, where you had guys playing out their contracts to then become a free agent.
Right.
We are already seeing that less and less.
Yeah.
The new rules around extensions. Look, if you're a Kawhi Leonard, Jalen Brunson this summer, and you have an opportunity to sign these extensions, Drew Holiday, to sign these extensions before you hit free agency, you're not going to become a free agent. And so if you look at how a lot of these teams are built, the Knicks probably being the exception. I'd have to run through all 8 teams that made the conference semifinals. The Knicks, of course, signed Jalen Brunson. Teams are not built through free agency, right? Teams are built through the draft, and teams are built through timely trades. And the point I might want to make on this is you need to hit on 2 things. Of course, if you can trade for an impact player and you know he's an impact player, by all means, go get him. If you have a top 5 pick, and you better hit on that. Of course, that's inherent, right? The point I want to make is, to me, it's the margins right now. If you're team building in the NBA, can you win on the margins? Can you win on minimum contracts? Can you win on trades that maybe on paper aren't as sexy as you think? You think about Denver, who got Aaron Gordon. Then the next year they got KCP. They hit, right? You go through some of these teams, and it's not lottery picks. It's not top 5 picks with guys. Like Siakam was a 27th pick. All right. Nembhard was a 2nd round pick. TJ was undrafted. Obi did not play well as an 8th pick for the New York Knicks, and they hit on that. Haliburton, 12th pick. Isaiah Jackson, 22nd pick. Ben Shepherd, who's a rookie, 26th pick. You go to Minnesota. Naz Reid was undrafted. Kyle Anderson, last pick of the 1st round. Rudy Gobert, 27th pick. They traded for him, obviously. Jaden McDaniels, 28th pick. Derrick Jones Jr., undrafted. Essentially a minimum contract. Daniel Gafford, 38th pick. Traded for him. PJ Washington, late in the lottery. So you need timely trades, and you need to hit in free agency on the minimum guys, and you need to hit in draft late. You need, and look, I talk with so many teams, Tim. I'm sure you do the same thing. You talk with so many teams about the draft, and some of the smartest people I know, it's a crapshoot, right? Of course. Yeah. It's some of it is dumb luck, and I get that. But if you do hit late, if you can get a rotation player in the 2nd round, if you can find the TJ McConnells of the world, right? If you can find the Fred VanVleets of the world, Toronto. Think about Toronto in that run in 2019, right? That was an undrafted guy. If you can get those guys, that gives you a leg up over everybody else. It's not, hey, we want to go sign this guy in free agency. No, you need to hit in the draft, and you need to hit late, and you need your minimum guys to be rotation players. Yeah. I mean, that is how you build a team.
I totally agree. And what you're describing is difficult. And so a lot of this comes down to the competency of the people making these decisions, because you're right. It's really, really important. You've got to be able, and what it does, by the way, JJ, what you're describing, if you hit on those guys in that manner and getting guys like that, it gives you incredible financial flexibility to then go hunt the big fish, to go get the top of the food chain type guys when that becomes available, because you've got other guys that are contributors, rotational players, winning players, that you've gotten other ways, 2nd round picks, undrafted free agents, a fairly reasonable free agent contract, maybe if you're getting a guy in that 7th, 8th man range. And then it gives you more financial flexibility, because you're not just doing that every summer, going and trying to put together those top 2 or 3 guys. And then the rest of the roster, you have nothing to spend on those guys. You've got to be so smart in who you're picking. I have some fun sometimes joking about second round picks as if they're, if I were like running a team, I'd kind of be like, what is this? What I just find in my sofa? Oh, it's a second round pick, and you just wad it up and throw it in a trash can. But the truth is, I just have fun with it, and people lose their minds. Like some of the guys that are like, the inside information people, they lose their minds over that. Like, oh my God, these picks are so important. Like, I know that they are, and we could go back every single draft. And this just came up yesterday because we're talking about Bronny, and potentially in the Lakers having a 55th pick. And I'm like, just looking at, okay, let's see who goes 55th in these past drafts. Who was a 55th pick? Aaron Wiggins was a 55th pick. He's a really important player for the Oklahoma City Thunder, in their rotation. So yes, you can do it. It's hard to get it right. Far more probably misses than get it right. But seems like the teams that have had great success in finding those guys and hit more often than not are the teams like we're kind of talking about now that are still playing because they've gotten guys in that manner, even if it is a trade that no one really batted an eye at, as in Daniel Gafford going to Dallas, and how significant I thought it was at the time. Nobody really, in fact, that night of the trade deadline, I remember we did a whole 1 hour thing wrapping up the draft that night. And they were like, any other thoughts? And I was like, we haven't mentioned Dallas yet. Like, they got Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington. Like, these are pretty big, important pieces for them, I think. But it kind of went under the radar, but look how important he has been for them. So you're right. But look, it requires really astute people that know and identify what a specific guy brings to the table in what they want to do and how they want to play and how they're going to be able to impact their team and be a guy that's going to get minutes on their team and view them in a different way. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, man. It's never more true than in the kind of players that you're talking about right now. And I hate to say it's true. And not all 30 teams have people that are really good at identifying that. And some franchises, they just seem to do it right all the time. And they're constantly coming up with these guys where they can reinvent themselves and they always maintain that flexibility at the top for those, those couple guys that are going to get a lot more money, obviously.
If your family's like ours, then your dog is everyone in your family's best friend. Our dog, Georgie, is my best friend, Chelsea's best friend, our kid's best friend, and quickly becomes the best friend of anyone who visits. Georgie likes to eat a lot of things, sometimes things that he's not supposed to. But one thing that he is allowed to eat and that he absolutely loves are Pepperoni original beef flavor snacks. Pepperoni treats have the meaty, delectable taste and aroma that has dogs running for it. Real beef is the #1 ingredient, no grains, fillers, or artificial flavors. Treat your BFF to the ultimate beefy flavor indulgence, Pepperoni. Georgie knows exactly where we keep our Pepperoni treats, and the second anyone opens that cabinet, he gets excited. Be your best friend's best friend with Pepperoni treats. Go to pepperoni.com. That's PUPPERONI.com to order Pepperoni today. Protect your BFF status and give them the one thing they can't get enough of, Pepperoni treats. Let's get into some specifics now about the conference finals. The guy I want to talk about to start is in the East, and that's Jaylen Brown. And he had a monster game in game 2. I mean, from the jump, the aggression, the downhill attacks, he's so dynamic in transition. And there's two things I want to say. I feel like there was a lot of, backlash, memes, a negative reaction to him signing the contract he did. Some of it was people just not understanding, the timing of when these extensions are up and how you hit, your window to sign the extension based on your All-NBA, not appearances, but All-NBA selection. And Jaylen Brown signed this massive extension. And, he talked a little bit last night after the game. And there's two things that stuck out. He's like, I don't give a fuck about All-NBA. I'm here to win. And that was awesome. But also just, it feels like with Boston right now, that they've played this entire season knowing there's only one outcome where they get judged as a success. That's really hard to do in professional sports.
Right.
There's only one outcome, and that outcome is a championship. If they don't win a championship, they will be deemed a failure, right? And, I think Tatum wears that probably more than anyone because he's the guy. I think Missoula probably wears that as well. Jaylen wears that too because of his contract. And I was so impressed throughout the regular season with small improvements on the margin in playmaking, small improvements in shot selection. He has been so good during this playoff run. And, you know, he talked a little, the second thing I wanted to make about last night was he talked a little bit last night about like how he views himself and this chip about feeling like in some ways he's underrated. And players, I think one of the markers of like, do people value me is our contract, right? It's how much we're getting paid. This guy's getting paid more than anybody in the league, essentially. He's got the biggest contract in history. And yet he still feels this chip on his shoulder that he's underrated, undervalued, that people don't view him in the same tier as other guys. And I think about Boston specifically. They have so many good players. Drew Holiday has been amazing in these 2 games, and he was great the last 3 games in the Cleveland series. Derrick White, who everybody knows, I'm admittedly a fanboy. But you can withstand an off Jayson Tatum stretch. You can withstand an off Jayson Tatum game because you have essentially a 1B in Jaylen Brown.
You've gone now a period of time over the second half of the season, JJ, where I always, you know, there's a lot of ways to describe this, the 2-star pairings. Like you could say 1 and 1A, or this guy's riding shotgun or whatever. I like to say like star, co-star, because I think in every case, almost you can identify which guy is like slightly a little bit higher on the totem pole, right? It just is. And some nights that's blurred in the regular season, obviously. But overall, for the most part, you kind of know it's clearly defined. And it was, I think, prior to about midseason this year. I think over the second half of the year, like when you watch them over the totality of, you know, I don't know, 40 games plus the playoffs, there's a lot of nights where it's like 2 stars. It's like these guys are basically on a given night, it could be either one of them. And he saw it again in game 2 of the series. And the way that he overwhelmed them, he overpowered that team. He overpowered the Indiana Pacers. It was like futile. Whatever was in front of him, he destroyed. And it was a variety of ways. He made some tough mid-range contested shots. He hit threes. He got out in transition. He turned the corner and finished in traffic at the rim. It was just such an aggressive, voracious style of play, and with great success at the end of it. So it wasn't like the super high volume shot night where he has decent numbers, but look at his shooting percentage overall, not that efficient, man. He was sensational. And I said with SVP after the game, we talked about him, and I said, you know, there's 3 all-league teams, and then there's going to be a bunch of dudes that are in the mix for like the quote snub list or whatever you want to call it, right? So there's a bunch of dudes that names are in there. And there's a lot of debate, and it's all relevant, and it's all legit because they're all opinions. I think there's 3 guys on the first team that are absolutely not debatable. Luka, Jokic, and Shea. There's no debating those 3 guys. I think beyond that, there's all kinds of debates. Even with Tatum and Giannis, man, and some of the guys on the second team, like those are legitimate debates you can have. Those first 3 guys are beyond reproach. Those are first team all-league players, period. Jaylen Brown last night, or in the game 2, carried himself like a first team all-league player. That's what he looked like in that game. And so there's even, though you say you're an all-league player, man, there's levels to like what is the responsibility as you start to go up into the first team all-league guys. Like what's Luka's responsibility every night? What is Jokic's? What is Shea's? That's why I said those 3 guys at the very top. Jaylen Brown kind of carried himself like that last night. Now, he didn't have the playmaking responsibility that some of those guys have too because of the nature of the position. He was more of a raw attacker in this game, but he carried himself like, no. Like this is mine. I own this, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. And it was so impressive to watch him play with that kind of confidence and success. And to your point, Jayson Tatum, very quiet first half, pretty good second half. Overall, kind of mild numbers by his standards. This is why this is the best thing that ever happened to Jayson Tatum. He has so much more margin for error on a given night where the team still has success that he's not carrying. They lose that game last night. Let's just say somehow Indiana makes a run. Siakam keeps it going. Indiana wins that game. But Brown and Tatum play exactly like they did, you know and I know, Tatum's getting crushed after the game. Going right in on him. That's the first thing you're going to hear. So now they don't lose the game on a night like that because of what he's got around him, even though we still understand you're first-team All-League player. First-team All-League player, and most likely the favorite, if they were to win it, to be the finals MVP, he would be the favorite right now going in if Boston were to win it. But yet on a night, any night really in the postseason, you can get that out of the guy that's next to you. Man, oh man, does that take a lot of pressure off of Jayson Tatum, knowing that Jaylen Brown is this good, this consistent, and like can do it at that level on a stage like that, putting you on the precipice of the finals. I think it's the best thing that's happened to Tatum, because at the end of the day, he's going to be judged if he doesn't get a ring soon this year, really. And so Jaylen Brown's going to help him do that, and he's going to be able to check that box. He's going to certainly help him do that. Now, look, they're going to get a great challenge out of the West. I'm not saying the Celtics are guaranteed to win this title. I'm just saying I think this is their best chance, and the big part of it is Jaylen Brown's emergence to this level of a player this consistently. It takes the pressure off Tatum having to be that every night. And as a result, I think it tones down the conversation around him a little bit, even on a night when he doesn't play particularly well, because they won the game going away. No one's concerned about what Jayson Tatum did last night for the most part, because we're so focused on how good Jaylen Brown was.
It feels like a little bit with the Celtics, and it's been like this all season. The Celtics can't win a championship until at least game 4 of the finals. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
Like, logistically, they can't win a championship until game 4 of the finals.
Yeah.
They have.
Yeah. They got work to do. Yeah.
They have one of the best net ratings, in NBA history in the regular season. They are 10-2 in the playoffs. They have the second best start in Celtics history, 17 championships for that franchise. 10-2 start, second best start through 12 games in franchise history. And it still feels like and I'll put all of us in there, all we do is complain about them. All we do is nitpick with them. And it's like we just constantly judge them. And that's part of the burden of expectation.
Yeah.
That's the league and the world we live in, and I'm part of that, and I'll own that. But they had the best offense in the league, second best defense. They've got one of the best offenses, along with Indiana. I think they're one now after last night. Best offenses in the playoffs. You hear people complaining about their offense, and they're missing, by the way, their third best player, their fourth best player, depending on how you viewed Derrick White. And it just feels like, I'm not saying it's unfair, Tim. I'm not saying it's unfair, because again, that's the burden of expectation. That's the world we live in. Can we just let the games play out? Can we just do we need the overreaction after every single game? Because I think regardless of Haliburton's, health going forward, I think they're going to win the Eastern Conference. And I think in either matchup, if Porzingis is available, they're the favorites in the championship, in the NBA Finals. I think they're going to win the championship. I don't make predictions. I don't like making predictions, but that's what I think. Yeah. That's what I feel. And I felt that.
Neither do I.
I felt that outside of maybe a month when I was like, you know what? Denver has a chance against this team. That's how I feel about this team. And I just feel like we spend too much time nitpicking. They're so dynamic. They're so good. They're so versatile. There was a stretch last night in the second half, and granted, I'll say this. I think Rick Carlisle pulled his guys a little too early.
Yeah.
Siakam didn't play the last 9:25. I don't think Miles Turner played in the fourth quarter. But there was a lineup on the floor where Jayson Tatum was at the 5 for a good stretch of the fourth quarter. And I think they're an excellent team with incredible talent. They're very well coached. Mazzulla is, in terms of thoughtfulness around strategy and the game, I'm not saying he's perfect, and I'm not saying he gets it right every time. I think he's as good as it gets. There's a number of coaches that are in that ilk, but he's as good as it gets. And I just feel like we're spending too much time because of 2022 finals, because of 2023 NBA Eastern Conference Finals. Let's focus on this team, and let's focus on this season. These guys are awesome.
I think, look, for me, I feel like for me personally, as much as I've talked about them, I have kind of tried to take the other approach in this way. How many times have the thermostat gotten turned up a little bit on them in the postseason? It's happened 4 times, I think, so far. Really 4 times. Losing game 2 in both of the first round series. Okay, so you may think these are inferior teams. There's no way they're beating Boston, the Heat or the Cavs, and they're both banged up. They're missing guys. I get it. Bottom line is it's 1-1, and they just lost. Miami makes a record number of threes, and then Cleveland beats them by 24 points. That's what happened in game 2, both series. For me, what they did after that is much more important. And what they did after that was not only just go on the road in game 3 and win a game or like a nail biter or lose the game, and now you really get the talk and the anxiety picking up. No, they went in there and they dominated those teams the next game and then won the next 2 after that to end it. So that's 2 of the times. Now, the other 2 times has been in this series. One, obviously, what happened in game 1. Now, there's no question, Indiana gagged that game up. Come on, that was a giant hairball that you saw Indiana cough up on that court. You can't lose a game when all you have to do is inbound the ball and make free throws, and you win the game. Not against that team in that building, the start of the conference finals, and what that would have meant to your team. You've got to get that done, right? They didn't. But listen, some of that had to do with Boston's pressure on that play. 3 different guys in the area. Drew takes away Haliburton in the corner. Nesmith's not open off the sideline. Derrick White's positioned right so that the ball can't come in toward Nesmith, who was open, I think, if Derrick White's not standing there. And then Jaylen Brown, he held him a little bit, but he closed the ground to force that tip goes out. Okay, so now you still have to make a shot, or that doesn't mean anything. And they do. They execute the play. Indiana fails to switch. Jaylen Brown makes a ridiculously difficult corner 3, and then they win the game in overtime. Okay. That thermostat got turned up in that game, because this isn't losing game 2 at home. This is losing game 1 at home on a night in which you couldn't guard them. That's a totally different level of anxiety going into game 2. All right. So that was the 3rd time. And I would say the 4th time was game 2, when Siakam went on that little personal run in the 3rd quarter to cut that game to 2. And it looked like, wow, here we go again. Like, Boston can't guard these guys. And first of all, that game felt like a 20-point game at halftime. The fact that Indiana was within striking distance was really mind-boggling to me. I'm like, how are they even in this game? It felt so dominant by the Celtics, especially the 2nd quarter. Indiana was stuck on 27 for a month, and yet they're in the game at halftime. It was weird. And then they come out and Siakam starts balling, and I'm like, wow, here we go. So there you go. Timeout, 2-point game. That's the 4th time that the thermostat was rising, because they're right back in that same boat. Are we going to be going to Indiana 1-1? Like we did in these first 2 series? Well, this is going to be a harder task playing this team on the road at 1-1 than it was either of those first 2. And guess what their response was? A dominant stretch from the middle of the 3rd quarter on, where they win the game going away. Don't even sweat it at the end. So I look at it like this. Yes, you're right. They're overly scrutinized. I think Jayson Tatum is overly scrutinized. I tweeted about this the other day. I was asked to finish a sentence on one of the shows I was on. It was, Jayson Tatum in the playoffs has been, and you have to finish a sentence. And I finished it by saying better than he's given credit for. That's how I finished that sentence. 5 years in a row, 25 points a game in the playoffs. 5 years in a row. 3 of the last 5 years, over 10 rebounds a game in the playoffs for your small forward. That's legit big time numbers. I think 3 or 4 of those 5 years, over 5 assists a game. Shooting percentages, you're right, they've come down. That's a fair criticism of him. But overall,
his jump shooting is a fair. That's if you're going to nitpick with Jayson Tatum, he hasn't been a great jump shooter in the playoffs the last 2 years.
Totally agree.
And he hasn't been a great jump shooter this year. If you want to nitpick, that's fine. That's a fact. Fair,
but he gets
that's a fact.
beat up.
That's not a narrative. That's a fact.
I agree, but he gets beat up like this dude just doesn't show up, and it's just not fair. That's just not fair when you look at it. He's had some rough nights. He also had a game, if you recall, last year in Philly, where he was like 1 for 11 or something, or maybe worse. and bang 3 threes to win the game and
Game
force
6
the game
down
7.
3-2 on the road.
Force
and
the
then
game
came back
7
with a
to
50
close
ball
it out.
in game 7.
Exactly. And that was one of those like star player, nowhere to be seen. Can you flick the switch when you have to in the last 3 minutes? Man, did he flick that switch? So, and we're not going to go over all this playoff performance. I'm just saying, I think overall in general, it's over scrutinized. Their team's over scrutinized. I look at it like when they have faced adversity, and it hasn't been a ton, their response has been pretty impressive. What they've done in this postseason run. The ultimate challenge, though, we all know it. They're going to get a high-level opponent in the finals, and a series that I think, no matter who comes out, it's going to be long. It's going to be tough. Totally different defensive challenge for Boston than what they've seen. Totally different challenge for their offense with those two teams. So that's when we'll finally, I think, be able to say, okay, forget everything that's happened to this point. This is all that matters. Now go get it done or not. And that to me is ultimately what I'm basing this entire season on for the Celtics. What happens in the finals, assuming they get there? I don't want to be disrespectful to Indiana, but this ain't looking good with what you did in game 1. That's going to be hard to recover from. If you have one in your hand against that team, you better hold on to it. They didn't. We all know we think Boston's going to the finals. I don't know if there's any person out there that doesn't think that. So that's, for me, I don't care what happened to get there. That's going to be my final grade. That's your term paper. I'm going to grade you on that series. And that's what I'm reserving judgment for. For the most part, I've tried to be optimistic about their responses to adversity so far, what little they have faced in the postseason.
Real quick. So last night in game 2, I think Bron and I talked about this on Wednesday. If we didn't, I'm going to talk about it now. The importance of finishing and starting quarters. And a lot of times you're not necessarily starting with your starting group. Certainly the third quarter, start of the first, all that stuff. So you have 8 segments to start a quarter, finish a quarter throughout the game. Last night in a 16-point win, Boston was plus 15 starting and finishing quarters. They won 7 of those 8 segments. The only segment they didn't win was when Siakam went crazy at the end of that second quarter. That's a massive thing, right? And whether that's, a lineup with Jaylen Brown as the number one option, whether that's Peyton Pritchard coming off the bench and making an impact, those segments are huge. And Indiana, because of the depth and because of the way they play, that to me, and look, I don't know what Haliburton looks like going forward, but regardless of whatever happens in this series, if they do make the finals, those little segments are massive for any team. And there's an emphasis there in Boston. Real quick, because you brought it up, and I want to clarify something, although I did clarify it on the broadcast, and I didn't hear your analysis either on SVP or the next morning. I am a believer, particularly when a team has no timeouts, like the Boston Celtics did at the end of game 1. I'm a believer that you foul up 3, and you play the free throw game, and you trust your guys. And I said on the broadcast, Mike asked me, would you foul here? And I said, absolutely. I'm fouling every time. I also said, after Jaylen Brown made that 3, because they didn't switch, because of the screen set by Derrick White, there was too much separation for Siakam. And when Jaylen Brown caught the ball, he's facing the basket. You can't foul there, right? That in that situation, you can't foul. And so much of like coaching and teaching this is, teaching switching. I was surprised. I think the biggest thing for me wasn't, because Rick said after the game, he was like, yeah, it was our intention to foul, but Siakam made the right play. He didn't foul. Teaching the switch, teaching how and when to foul is massive. Siakam should not have fouled Jaylen Brown in the corner. Because Jaylen Brown is facing the ball. He's in a triple threat position. If you go reach for the ball, he's going to go through your arms, and he's going to get 3 free throws. He hit a ridiculous shot. He hit an absolutely ridiculous shot. The disappointing thing to me was, and I want to get your thoughts on this. You're up 3 with, let's call it 8 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it was. I think the shot went in with 7 seconds. So let's call it 10 seconds.
I think it was.
You're up 3 with 10 seconds.
Yeah, there was
it's a little bit different.
I think there was 8.5. I think it was 8.5.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
It's a little bit different if the ball's on the side versus underneath the basket. Because the play and the way teams will screen and try to get a guy open, it's a different pass. It's a different screening angle.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. Does a slip to the basket for a 2-pointer hurt you in that situation?
If you're Boston?
No. If you're Indy?
Oh, no, of course not. No,
it doesn't.
No.
So why aren't you selling out? I mean, I don't want to be extreme here, but I mean, I've seen this happen where teams will just put 5 guys around the arc in that situation, right? You have to sell out to guarding the 3. And if you are in a position where the coach says, hey, we're trying to foul here, then that's your only concern. It's the slip to the basket. If Derrick White, if TJ McConnell switches that, if Derrick White gets on the low side and slips to the basket and scores a layup, you're fine. You're fine. Take the ball out, go shoot free throws, right? That was the disappointing thing to me. It wasn't that they didn't foul Jaylen Brown, because I didn't think they should have fouled Jaylen Brown in that situation. The thing that disappointed me was they didn't sell out to the 3-point line.
Completely. You got to position all your defenders above that line. And if you're not going to do that, obviously, then you have to switch it. Now, one thing I would have considered, I know TJ McConnell is super cerebral and he's really quick and he's a one of your great on the ball defender. He's also a guy you can shoot over. And if Boston's trying to get a 3 and you got a switch take place where somebody catches the ball and it's TJ McConnell in front of you, who's not going to be like up under you because he's going to be afraid of you landing on him or committing one of those fouls. That's a guy you can shoot over. You've got options for like bigger guys for this switching so that at least on a hand up, it's a different feel. But I'm not going to say, hey, he should have been off the floor. I just wanted to make that point because I thought about it the next day when I watched it because that was the action. It was Siakam and TJ. And for them not to be positioned in a way that you are absolutely just almost zoning up, waiting for the guy to come to your area. And the only way that they're going to get the ball is to do exactly what you're saying. Well, then go ahead and slip. So then if Siakam jumped on the high side of Derrick White after the screen, and Derrick White flashed right to the ball, caught it late and in, there's probably 7.5 seconds left or 7, and you're still up 1. Okay, you're still in control of the game. Get in and make a couple free throws. That's less time, and then they're going to have to make another 3 to tie the game. No timeouts. You absolutely concede that. And if you're not going to teach it that way or talk about that in the huddle and literally take that whiteboard, JJ, which I've done so many times I've coached in this situation, and you're positioning your guys literally completely on the outside of the 3-point line, no matter what, it's got to be funneled toward the paint and toward the rim and inside the 3-point line. If you're not going to do that, at worst, you've got to switch everything. Switch everything. So the ball cannot come in easily that way. They didn't do either of those things. Jaylen Brown, caught you're 100% right about that. Siakam was 5-6 feet away when he caught the ball. He's
Can't foul there.
He's starting to get it loaded up already. What are you supposed to do? The one thing I'll say is that you could tell he ran over. He was very self-conscious at that point because Jaylen Brown, he grabbed it and then he kind of put it back here on his hip and froze Siakam for a second. But then when he went up, Siakam put his hands straight back behind him and like chested him a little bit like this. And was so afraid of like hitting him or having Jaylen Brown land on his foot or whatever. He didn't even put a hand up. And he's 6'9", 6'10". Maybe that makes a difference. I don't know. The guy made a hell of a shot. They did not, bottom line is this, they did not handle any of that situation well. I'll take you back real quick if we have time, real quick. I don't think people talk to this. I noticed it on the replay the next day when I kept watching it. A couple things happened on that play. First is Miles Turner grabs the defensive rebound up 3, and Derrick White fouls him immediately. Nobody's talked about it. He took both hands and raked across his chest right before he outletted the ball to Haliburton. My point is, they could have blown the whistle right there, right? And it would have had a different feel to it right then. Instead, they get it out to Haliburton. Now, Haliburton gets it. Look at the replay. Jayson Tatum is running from the middle of the court toward him on the sideline. If Haliburton had gone up the sideline a little bit, Drew Holiday was at half court. Drew Holiday would have come toward him right in the middle of the floor, unguarded, is Nembhard. You could throw the ball to Nembhard, who probably is going to advance it over half court, get fouled, Clock at that point, my guess, around 4.5, 5 seconds, and you're shooting free throws. Didn't happen. Instead, you end up now having to inbound the ball one more time. Now, you guys talked about the timeout on the broadcast? I'm assuming, like, not taking it.
You know, that's the one thing we talked about this in our production meeting. We didn't talk about them not calling a timeout on the Siakam play. So on the Haliburton turnover, it actually would have been more time, Tim, that they would have fouled with, because I think that turnover occurred at about 27 seconds. But again, it's an anomaly. To me, it's like Haliburton's bringing the ball up, and Drew wasn't pressuring
the unforced
him yet.
one. Yeah, the unforced turnover.
The unforced one, he dribbled it off his leg with 27 seconds to go. But I know what you're saying. So the trap would have come right across half court. You get it to Nembhard. He's got free throws. We didn't talk about the timeout. And Rick, you know, to his credit, was like, I should have called timeout with Nembhard taking the ball out and advance the ball and play the free throw game. No, it's just it's wild. You know, you bring up the thing you brought up, and by the way, the other thing, because I've seen so many angles of the three, partially because, you know, we have every camera when we're on the broadcast, and as we're doing the Open yesterday, I was like, hey, I want to start, you know, how we got to game 2. I want to start with Jaylen Brown's shot, and we looked at a bunch of different angles, and we had an angle that was basically behind the Pacers bench, right? And Haliburton is on the ball, and he essentially allowed that pass to the corner. Mm-hmm. And I want to just explain to people,
right,
that if you're guarding the inbounder on a baseline out of bounds play, what you are taught is 1,000, 1,000. You take away that pass to the opposite corner, and then you jump to the high side. And so Joe's play was essentially on both sides. It was the same action. It was a curl to a rescreen flare. And he ran it for Tatum on one side and Brown on the other. And so Haliburton is not in position to take away that pass, because that's how it's taught. You take away the pass for 2 seconds, and then you jump to the strong side corner. And it just wasn't there. So we have a few minutes here, and I know we both got to run. I want to jump, and I'm glad we spent most of our time on this series because of the relevancy, because we got a day in between games. Game 2 tonight with Dallas and Minnesota. Two things I want to talk about as it relates to this series. Number one is Minnesota's desire to not put 2 on the ball. Mm-hmm. And number 2, because you brought this up, and I immediately was like, Kyrie Irving, you brought up this idea of not a 1A and a 1B or 1 and a 2. It's co-stars. And when I think of co-stars right now, I think of Luka and Kyrie. Mm-hmm. Because Kyrie, to start that game, got whatever the fuck he wanted. And it certainly helped Dallas, but in some ways it helped Luka. It helped Luka, right? He was so good to start that game, which he hasn't done throughout these playoffs. You know, it wasn't like a my turn, your turn thing like we've seen. It was like, no, I'm just going to go out there, and this is what the defense is giving me. I've got the mid-range. Rudy's in a deep drop. I've got my floater. I can get to the basket and shoot my little bank shot. I thought he was just phenomenal to start that game.
Yeah, and that was a big topic, because he had spent the couple first halves in the previous series kind of feeling his way, right? More of a facilitator, and then he could turn it on later if he had to. I was worried about that strategy for Dallas because of this defense. And what happens if Luka's getting all kinds of, pressure early and he's not making shots, and you're in that mindset? It's a little bit more of a passive mindset, move the ball, feel my way mindset. He wasn't at all. He came out, and it was, he reminded me a lot of when he was playing in Cleveland with LeBron. That's what he looked like to me. Like that same mindset. No, right now I'm just thinking raw scorer, and that's what I'm going to do. And he was putting so much pressure on them. His finishes in that game alone, the collection of finishes that he had in the paint were spectacular. And he's one of the best in this league to ever do it at that size, with the way he finishes in the paint, either hand, different angles, high kisses off the glass, whatever it takes. He had so many in that game, and he was making Anthony Edwards work his tail off chasing him, because he was really active with his dribble, active off the ball, coming off screens. definitely made Anthony Edwards work. And look, they got hit with a punch early. Minnesota wasn't missing anything in the beginning of that game. Jaden McDaniels hits 3 straight threes. Like they're tuning them up. If Kyrie Irving is not in the right mindset to go play that exact game in the first half, they might be down 12 points at halftime. Instead, it was 3. And that's going to feel a lot different to Minnesota and Dallas coming out of the locker room. So I thought Kyrie's approach was exactly what Dallas had to have just to stay where they were, like keep this thing at neutral. And now let's get into the second half where it becomes more about game management. And we've got the best guy still playing in the playoffs in managing the game. And that's Luka Doncic. And that's what Luka did in the fourth quarter. And the adjustment, there's 2 adjustments I think are going to be made. One, you're going to have to make more of a decision on getting the ball out of his hands. I'm sorry. I said it before the series. The reason I picked Dallas for me primarily was because I don't think Luka's affected that much by length and quickness. He's affected more by strength. And because he plays slower, if you don't give ground on those nudges with his shoulder that he likes to hit you with, if you're not backing up, you're Lou Dort, you're wearing him out a little bit more. You're taking his legs, you're hand on the release. Even the biggest shot of the game when they're up 2 inside of a minute, when he hit that little 18-footer over McDaniels, that was such an easy shot for him because he hit him with his shoulder. McDaniels, because he's so slightly built.
You talk about the right hand little
the
little
right hand mid range jump shot.
I think it was 106, 102.
McDaniels like gives ground.
102. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like if you think about for the circumstances, that shouldn't have been that easy of a shot. It wouldn't look that easy, I don't think, in the Oklahoma City series. It did because of the personal individual matchup that he's got. And I think you're going to have to take the ball out of his hands more because he's going to have a lot of success with these matchups, I believe. So that's one adjustment for them. How do you deal with Luka in a different way? Or else I think you're going to get a lot of the same result. And then the other thing is obviously 49 threes, man. Your top 3 scorers in the postseason took 30 3-point shots combined. 30. McDaniels, Towns, and Ant.
Dallas was selling out on help side.
No, they were.
They packed the paint like those. Like
you
always talk about with coaching. You always talk about, hey, what are you willing to like give up? It was Anthony Edwards staring down his man, a shift from the nail, a shift from the corner. We're willing to live with you guys taking 40+ threes.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I actually said it on Van Pelt after the game. I called it Giannis treatment. It reminded me of Toronto, the year they beat the Bucks. They were when Bucks won the first 2 games in that series, and they had Kawhi. Toronto had Kawhi. The next 4 games, they went to that exact look. Because Giannis at that time was operating a lot for the top of the key. And that's exactly where Ant was a lot of last night. And you had one on the ball with some space, so daring him to kind of take it, but close enough to get a hand up. 2 guys at the elbows, 2 guys on the block. And that's what Anthony Edwards was looking at. Basically a 1-2-2 format, like the corner guys wide open, wings, some space. So I hear you. You're right. And I that was for Anthony Edwards, and it definitely was effective in terms of how he was processing what he was going to do. And he took 75% of his shots were threes off the dribble. That's a win for Dallas. What I'm talking about is where I think Minnesota can make the adjustment, besides Anthony Edwards off the ball, and I think even just trying to get it to him a little bit faster, like early, like catch it and go before they have a chance to like sit there and shift and line up and inch over and get you in their sights a little bit quicker. But my thing is this. They took literally every half-decent 3 they got. And I'm saying some of those are wide open. Take them. But I'm talking about the ones, if you look, 49 of them, there was a number of those, JJ, where there's a guy kind of running at you and he's about 5 feet away and they're closing out and you shoot it anyway, where maybe that could be one of these and take it back down into the paint and see what their reaction is. I just felt like it was like this. Their strategy was, here's the catnip. You guys are the cats. You can't resist it. We're giving you all this space and you're going to take it. And I don't think that's a winning formula for Minnesota to have their balance sheet look like that. 49 threes, less 2s. They only took 40 threes once in the entire postseason. And I think that's too high for them, even 40. So let's see what their adjustment is to the exact same look that they're going to get in game 2. Because why would Dallas change? Let's see what they do differently offensively to try to maybe turn down some of those half-decent ones to see if you can get back into the lane, beat somebody off the dribble, where you have an opportunity to get a shot up on the glass in the paint, and your offensive rebounding is more of a factor. I just want to see a more well-rounded and balanced offensive game out of Minnesota than just felt like 1-3 after another. And I think that Dallas wins if that's what they're going to end up doing, and they can't figure out a way to attack them and attack this look defensively. I think that's going to be a problem for Minnesota.
Real quick, because I think you brought this up with Luka in the drop against Gobert, and I want to be very specific on this. And I think this will evolve throughout the series. And I want to bring this up because it's important for Game 2, and we'll see what happens tonight. But it's important throughout. Is they want to not put 2 on the ball. And Stan brought this up a number of times on the broadcast. The problem with Luka, and you could put LeBron in this sort of ilk too, Harden for sure, is these bigger guys, when you put 2 on the ball, they can make every pass. They can throw the pass across their body. They can make the behind the back pass to the popper. They can hit the short roller. So you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Gobert in drop versus Luka. This is a crazy stat. In Game 1, Dallas scored 1.41 points per possession when Luka was in a pick and roll and Gobert was in drop. For the season, Luka versus drop was the 3rd best player in the NBA at 1.15. So 26 points better per 100 possessions in that Game 1 with Gobert in a drop. Despite that, Gobert defending at the rim, Dallas shot 55% when he was on the floor. When he was off the floor, they shot 100%. They were 14 for 14. So it's not, in some cases, both things can be true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like him on the floor helps your team.
Mm-hmm.
They have to figure out the coverage in the Luka pick and roll, particularly in late game. Because I thought in that fourth quarter, and he had 15 points in the fourth quarter, I thought in that fourth quarter, he just manipulated every angle and got whatever he wanted. He got to his spot every single time. And so
he did. Yeah.
I don't look, I think the big thing that people talk about with the great players are like, oh, you got to mix it up. You got to mix it up. Yes. Okay. I think you do have to mix it up, but you also have to recognize time and score and what you're willing to live with, what you're willing to give up. And to me, late game, Luka versus drop, I'm not living with that, especially against Jaden McDaniels. I'm just not, because your point on Lou Dort versus Jaden McDaniels, it's valid, right? It's valid. He doesn't play fast. He's got size. He's got strength. He's got width. He's going to body Jaden McDaniels. And so I think in some ways, late game particularly, Minnesota has to look to do something different in that pick and roll with Luka Doncic.
I completely agree. And this is why I trust Luka so much and trust Dallas. And that's why, I think of the people remaining that are playing, and honestly, even going into the playoffs, every single player, with maybe the exception of Jokic, but I'm not even sure that I might put Luka at the very top of the list in terms of, okay, we've just battled for 44 minutes. It could go either way. We've got Luka controlling the action the rest of the way, making all these decisions, whether it's a shot maker or finding someone, whatever's required. I'll take him against anybody. And so the only way that I would feel maybe different is if somehow you're affecting him in the actions he wants to run. And they were not doing that in that moment of the game. Down the stretch, he got what he wanted because he got the coverages he wanted. He has the personnel guard him that he's comfortable with, and what they were doing with the second defender. Very comfy, cozy. You can't let him live in that place, man. It's going to be the same. And I'll say this too. We haven't even talked about this. I thought he looked better physically. I know his legs started doing the Kurt Schilling bloody sock thing again. Everybody was joking about, all of a sudden out of nowhere, his knee starts bleeding. But I thought for me, he looked better. He didn't, at no point did I really see him limping around. He didn't look like painfully slow to get up if he ended up on the floor like he did in the previous 2 rounds. So that contributed to it. And I think just not being involved in this sumo match with Lou Dort, when he got to that part of the game, he felt fresher. His legs were fresher, so he could make the type of shots that we're used to seeing him make when he's at his best that I think he was missing to this point in the postseason. He looks good. He's very comfortable with what they're throwing at him defensively. Minnesota's got to do something different. I think you're 100% right. And that's going to be a big part of what we're going to be looking at if you get to a one-possession game again, coming out of that last mandatory timeout. What is Minnesota going to do differently on him?
Tim, always a pleasure. You'll be with us throughout the rest of the season on this show and the Old Man and Three Things. Always good chatting basketball with you, man.
It's been great, buddy. You got it, man.